Hello, in this video I'm going to show how to install Google Chrome, Visual Studio Code, Git, and GitBash. So most Windows 11 computers are going to come with Microsoft Edge by default, and I prefer to work with Google Chrome, specifically the developer version, so that we can have access to the most recent features and use Google as our search engine. So I'm just going to download Chrome Dev for Windows 11 and install it. While we're waiting, I'm just going to go ahead and download Git. So, often confused with GitHub or GitLab or certain Git providers, Git is just generally the version control software that allows you to communicate with those other services that will store your code. So Git is the part that actually runs on your computer and is the most universal part that you might be familiar with from GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket or any of those other Git solutions. So I'm going to switch over to using Google Chrome Developer, which is pretty much just like regular Google Chrome, but it has some extra developer features. So this is the setup for Git. I'm going to click Next. It's going to install it there. I'm going to look through and make sure. So .sh files are going to be run with bash. Add a git bash profile to the Windows terminal. I do want to do. And everything else looks fine. For this, I'm going to select using Visual Studio Code as Git's default editor. That would be in the case that you, for example, want to review differences when you're merging code using Git. It might be able to show you those differences in Visual Studio Code. And you could always change this setting later. I guess it wants me to probably have that installed. So for now, I'll just select Notepad. The initial branch, I'm going to override the default branch for new repositories and call it main. It used to be master, but this is generally not regarded as a good title to use for historical reasons. This looks fine. And using the bundled OpenSSH seems fine. Even though there's probably already one installed on Windows. This looks fine. This looks fine. It's going to commit code using universal new line characters, even though Windows tends to use a slightly different new line format. I'm just going to use Windows default console window. Or maybe we'll use this one. This is fine. And that's fine. Fine. I'm not going to sign into Chrome. I'm going to skip this. Actually, I do want that to be in my default browser. So if you need to do that later, you can go to default apps, and browser is going to be one of the main settings for you to pick. So I'm going to set that as the default browser so that Edge is not anymore. And just going to turn off some ad features here that I don't really want enabled. And the last piece of software we're going to want is Visual Studio Code. Download for Windows. Accept. Install looks fine. That's fine. It's adding code, the word code, all lowercase, to the system path. That means when I type in a terminal code, it's going to run the VS Code program, and that'll be useful. And I'm going to launch GitBash and not view the release notes. And this is going to let you have, on Windows, let you have a familiar bash terminal. So you could use typical Linux commands that are common to bash and other shells, like ls. And I just use Control+ to zoom in a little bit. So if I ls to list, this is just my home directory, pwd, print working directory. I'm in C user, and while Windows uses the backslash and like C:\\, the GitBash is going to use the standard Linux /. And so whenever you want to access something on your hard drive directly, or one of your hard drives, you'll use the drive letter like this, and then the path will have /s instead. So it's kind of like a Linux mount point for your file system. And if you were to cd to your home directory, that is, my user is called user, so C user's user. So we're going to launch Visual Studio Code. And now, since we installed Git and GitBash, Git, which is a program that is installed across our computer and separate from GitBash, is going to be available in this terminal. So when I type Git, it's going to give me the manual page for the Git program, which is installed on my computer. But just to show you that, I could also open the standard terminal app and use a different terminal. Because I checked that option, now GitBash is one of these options I have in my Windows terminal, which is nice. But if I were to just use PowerShell, I should also have a Git command as well. So Git is installed across the system, not just in GitBash. But the advantage to using GitBash is that in PowerShell, maybe some of the newer versions you can do commands like ls, but if you were to use the standard command prompt, they don't have the same command set in the Windows command prompt. So you have all these different types of terminals. Generally, the most universal language is going to be that bash language. So now that we're in VS Code, there's an integrated terminal, and I want to show you that because you can also use GitBash through this integrated terminal by selecting a different terminal using this little drop down here. So I can select GitBash there, and I can also make my default terminal to be GitBash, so that whenever I open a terminal, it's going to automatically open to that GitBash terminal. and that way I have ls standard bash commands. And again, I have Git installed on the system now. So I'm not going to show you what to do with Git yet, but you have VS Code installed with nothing logged into anything, and you have a Git installed, and you have Chrome for Developers set as your default browser. You could also just get standard Google Chrome, but this is the one I would recommend getting.